We have been talking about shame for the past few weeks, and shame is a topic that may offer us significant suffering and incapacitation. It's also an experience that can offer us joy, transformation, and world-transcending self-confidence. We started by trying to distinguish between a certain sort of shame that is problematic, that prevents us from growing, that makes us feel more stuck, that causes us to become disconnected from others, from ourselves, from our own conscience, and from a positive future. This sort of shame is something that most people think of when one uses the word shame, at least in our culture. There's a sense of shame as a bad thing. They say the word shame and people feel bad. I've gotten many requests to talk about shame, and most of them are referring to it as something not only negative, but actually damaging. So, it's important for us to talk about something else, which we might call correcting our behavior. We might call following our conscience. This is something which is discussed in the Buddhist tradition since ancient times, and is typically taken to be an extremely positive experience. It's actually taken to be the basis of the spiritual path, to consider how we behaved in the past and how we can improve that. In some traditions we might call this repentance, but here, as I said, we thought we'd call it correcting or following one's conscience. And it's important for us to make room, for us to consciously open up a view of this as a positive, in fact, as the most positive experience in human life. We should consider how fortunate we are if we are in a position to experience this conscience, this correcting, because this is the place where transcendence begins. It's not only the place where transformation begins, and it is that. It's certainly the place where transformation begins, but furthermore, it's the place where transcendence begins. So we can transform ourselves so that we're a better and better person. We can also transcend ourselves to return to our true nature, which isn't merely a better person. So it's very important that we consciously open up to the possibility that something that we might refer to as shame could be a positive thing. So even before I continue, because we will be getting into some interesting subjects this evening, I'd ask you to consciously take some time to open up to this. Can you open that door, please? Open up to this as a positive experience. This following of our conscience, this desire and ability to review and correct our behavior. This could offer us great joy. This could be based on and could result in great self-confidence. Consider this sense of regret. I did such and such a thing, and it was damaging, not beneficial. In the future, I can change. I can improve on that. And in fact, I might discover that that loving, selfless behavior is in accordance with who I truly am, and that that selfish ignorant behavior was not in accordance with who I truly am. That might be discovered. And in that way, my understanding of my own nature, human nature, and nature may deepen, become more accurate and true. Very good. To start the evening, I'd like to tell a couple of very brief stories about two significant spiritual teachers, one of whom I suppose most of you have heard of, one of whom I suppose most of you have not heard of. The first is the Apostle Thomas, who was one of the disciples of Jesus of Nazareth, often referred to as Jesus Christ, the Anointed One, who was one of the major founders of the tradition that we now call Christianity. How many of you have heard of Thomas? Okay. He's usually called, what? Doubting Thomas, yes.
Didymus.
What?
Didymus.
Oh, is that right?
Another.
Oh, really? Oh, very good. I didn't know.
He's the twin.
Oh, okay, yes. There are a lot of stories about Thomas, but the one that I'd like to talk about right now is about faith. And this happened after Jesus was crucified and went into the cave for 3 days and then was resurrected, came back out of the cave and was meeting people again. And Thomas met him and couldn't believe that this was true, couldn't believe that this was really his master. And he said, "Only once I've seen the holes of the nails in your flesh will I believe." And so Jesus showed him that, and then he said, "Okay, I believe." And Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." Oftentimes this is, well, to be blunt, totally misunderstood as advising us to have blind faith. This story is much, much deeper than that. This is a kind of faith that is the opposite of blind faith. Compared to this not blind faith, what you see with your eyes and hear with your ears, trusting that is blind faith. So, that's the first one. The second story is about another saint named Milarepa. How many of you have heard of the great saint Milarepa? Okay, very good. So, fewer. He was, many would say, well, let's just put it the same way as Jesus, being one of the significant founders of Christianity. Milarepa was one of the significant founders of the Kagyud school, the Kagyudpa sect of Vajrayana, or we might say Tibetan Buddhism. And near the end of his life, he did many ascetic practices. He was very wise. His poems are simply brilliant. And if you have a chance to learn more about him, I'd recommend it. He's very, very inspiring. And absolutely authentic. It's simply, it's both shocking and comforting to read about him and to read his songs. So he described what religion is to him, what a spiritual practice is to him. His definition was, this path for me is to live and die without regret. That's what this is. This path is what allows us to live and die without regret. Now, as we know, one way you can live and die without regret is by becoming callous and sociopathic. Yes, this is one option if you wish to be without regret. You stop caring, you become insensitive, and you stop worrying about whether you've been helpful, hurtful in your life. So for now, let's consider that this is a real danger for us. This is very dangerous. But there's good news. I have good news for you. It won't work. You will fail to avoid regret by using that strategy. You may think you're succeeding, you may hope you're succeeding, you may guard yourself against failing in this way, but you will nonetheless fail and not succeed. You will still have regret, and it will just become more pernicious. It will just infect your heart more deeply and become the thing that most of us think of as shame. Yes? So, that's the first blow in this talk. Sorry. The first blow is if you hear me say shame and you get tight and feel incapacitated and afraid, then that's because you are to some degree. It's okay, you'll fail at this eventually, but you're currently succeeding at being callous and sociopathic. It's okay. You won't work it out in the end. It won't work. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It's very, very difficult to maintain this, and it's exhausting. It goes against your nature, and so soon enough, it will fall apart. So that's the good news. The knife here is showing us, is expressing to us, is asking us to look at how it is that we may have tried. We may have, through a lack of self-confidence, tried to be removed, tried to, as we talked about last time, hold shame at arm's length, tried to push it away, tried to not face it. And those efforts are creeping in and poisoning us. It isn't working, it's now devouring our heart. It's better to look at this right away and fully and face it and have faith, even if you haven't seen that this could be true, but have faith that this isn't who you are, this isn't your nature. It won't work. That's the good news. You won't be able to hold your conscience at arm's length forever because you don't want to. You actually don't want to. That's why it won't work. So that's good news. That's very good news. And it's such good news that it must, and it will destroy your life. That's how good news is. It's better news than your life is. Yes? So that's pretty good news. You'll choose it over your life in the end. And that's really good news. Over these talks, I have discussed, so consider how good your life is. This is better than that. That's why it's good news. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you wouldn't choose this over your life, right? Consider how wonderful everything in your life is. All of the pleasure and happiness and fulfillment you have, it's not as much as this is. So that's great. I mean, I'm offering you something that you want more than everything you want. That's pretty good, right? I can see the doubt, but that's what I'm saying. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. I've talked a lot about certain Buddhist cultures in which this sense of shame is understood, is experienced as being somewhat foreign. And I did that on purpose in preparation for this talk. Because I had the chance in visiting a friend of mine, a very mature woman, the most mature women, American women anyway, who I've ever met, who we went to college together, and she left and she married a yak herder in Tibet. She's the second wife of a yak herder in Tibet. This is to me extremely impressive and is an indication of of the truth of the talk that I'm giving. She was married, and she and her husband were having a baby, and so I went to visit them there. And I had the chance to travel from the center of China, near Chongqing, out through Kham and into Tibet, and then down south. And in going through those areas, and having also lived in Ladakh, which is even further to the west in India, prior to that, I had the chance to see the Tibetan, you could say, culture, a very, very Buddhist, a very non-modern culture, as it is transforming. And it's important that we know that while it used to be true that the sense of shame as a problematic experience was foreign, the sense of shame as a kind of self-hatred, a lack of self-confidence, used to be foreign there, it is no longer foreign there. And this isn't entirely or even primarily due to the influence of Christian missionaries. It's primarily due to simply the normal, modern Chinese, which just means modern right now, culture infiltrating Tibet. And you can watch this happening. You can watch it moving to the west. And more, this sense of deep shame, of self-hatred, is common there. The same as it is now common here. And we should wonder about why this is. We should look at this very closely. And the reason we should look at it very closely is that while it might seem overwhelming, and I know it might seem overwhelming, it should actually feel overwhelming. There's a reason we feel so ashamed. Of course, to a certain extent, it's about unskillful experience of regret. To a certain extent, it's unskillful experience of regret. It's not skillfully knowing how to review our behavior, consider how we should change our behavior, and then successfully doing so. To a certain extent, it's that. To that extent, you can do some meditation techniques and you can change your self-talk and it will work. To that extent, and I'd recommend that you use meditation techniques and you change your self-talk because it'll work to a certain extent. But I would suggest that there's a much deeper and much bigger problem here. And that is that to a large extent, the shame we experience is legitimate. It's valid. We should feel ashamed. And what should we feel ashamed of? Well, to put it quite bluntly, most of us, most of the time, are cogs in a vast global machine that is destroying life on this planet. It has been doing that for tens of thousands of years. And it's continuing to do it at an accelerating rate. It's not slowing down. And most of us are not just complicit, but actually participatory in this machine. So it's not surprising that we would feel bad about ourselves. If that's what we're doing with our lives, this precious life that we have, if that's what we're giving our life energy to, our minds to, our bodies to, our time to, our energy to, if that's what we're doing, then yeah, we'll feel bad. If we're not, say, a yak herder in the highlands of Tibet, but on the contrary are participating in this financial structure, in a social structure, in a military structure that is continuing to eliminate species, habitats, cultures, languages, mindsets, and life, if we're a part of that and complicit or participatory, if that's what we're doing with our lives, if that's what we're actually doing, then yes, we ought to be ashamed. Yes, we should. We should be ashamed. And we should deeply feel that shame and not hold it at arm's length. until it totally transforms our lives and pulls us out of that system and gives us a lifestyle that dismantles that system. That's what it takes if you want to overcome this deep shame that we have. That's just what it takes. Your only other option is to hold the shame at arm's length and wait for it to slowly devour your heart. That's a valid option. You can do it, and ultimately you will fail. So you can fail at what is bad, or you can succeed at what is good. This is your choice. We can succeed at what is good. We can totally change our lives. We can do it. Sadly, we see that most of the time, that is not what happens. It's hard to do that. I live with, many of you know that I live with this demographic that people call millennials. And millennials have a thing about this other demographic that they call baby boomers. They don't like baby boomers. They feel like, baby boomers, you failed us. You said that you were going to change the world, remember? Remember that part? When you were changing the world? Remember that? Then what happened? Then you just became more world.
We sold out.
You sold out. Exactly. Don't sell out. Yes? It's, it's true, but unfortunately I don't think that millennials have the luxury of complaining about that. Partially because we don't have time for complaining, and partially because I don't see any indication that millennials are not going to sell out.
They're keeping all the stuff we gave them.
So what is it that allows us to not sell out? What is that? We have to look at this and not stop looking at it until we have the answer. We have to really look. What could it be? Because as I say, there's nothing more valuable than this. If you have to answer that question, it will give you more happiness than your entire selling out life. The entire life that you can get from selling out won't give you as much happiness as the knowledge of how to not sell out, even though then the struggle begins. Yes, the struggle begins then. I'm not claiming it'll be easy at that point. It'll be hard. Okay, fine, it's hard, but that difficulty will be more satisfying than the ease of selling out. I have many friends from high school. Almost all of them have sold out. Just talking about high school. I'm just talking about the people I really know from when I was a child. Almost all of them have sold out, and I just watched them one by one selling out, one after the next. Most of them had sold out by the end of high school. The few who hadn't had sold out by the end of college, except for a very few who just sold out one by one as the years went by. I know some who had a deep practice. One who always said, I will never do this thing. This thing is at the center of the man, right? This machine that's destroying the world. I will never do that. If I ever do that, I will deny that I'm doing it. And I would ask you to lie to people if they ask you if I'm doing it. Yes? She at that time had a spiritual practice, but that spiritual practice became for her a way to make a living. And guess what she's now doing with her life?
Yoga.
No, although that is usually pretty bad. She is doing exactly the job that she is most ashamed of doing, that she said for decades she would never do. And she's justifying it. Yes? And I asked why? Why? And the answer is clear. Because I want to be socially accepted and I want a nice apartment. That's why. What is it that could free us from the slavery to being socially accepted by a society that is the most evil thing that has ever happened on this planet? I mean, we're slaves to to this pressure, this social pressure of a machine that is doing the most evil thing of all time. And we follow it. We say, okay, well, you make a good point, I'll do what you say. What is it that could free us from that? And what is it that could free us from the desire to be comfortable? Have a nice apartment. Or whatever that is for us. What is that? This is the question, because that's the thing that can free us from this experience of shame. If we don't have that tool, if we don't actually have that thing, then we have no right to complain and say, you sold out, but I'm not going to. Because we don't have the thing that we need to not do that. We think, no, that won't happen to me. We actually believe that. The same as we believe, well, I'm not going to get cancer and I'm not going to die. Those are things that sometimes happen to other people. We are delusional in this way. And we have to take very seriously the reality that if we don't have the tools that we need to break free of this system, at the very least, break free of it. At the very least, become the second wife of a yak herder in Tibet. Okay? That's the minimum. And she's done a lot more than that. But that's the minimum. Okay? That's the starting point. At least do that. At least get out of this evil system. At least do that. But furthermore, if possible, it would be good to also establish something that competes with and dismantles that system. If you can do that, if you can change how you actually live, well then, this shame will go away. It will go away and it will legitimately and truly go away. And you won't have to just change your self-talk. Okay? It's no longer just a change of attitude, it's a change of lifestyle. And the question of how do you actually pull that off is a huge question that people have been answering for thousands of years, but not in a way that anyone listens to. We know this answer. It's called whatever you want to call it. Religion, say. Spirituality, say. The path. Whatever you want to call it. We know what it is. And it works. It works. It actually works. And I know people who sold out, and I know people who then escaped from that. And a lot of them are in this room. How did it happen? We should look at this. And I know it's frustrating that you come here for answers and you want me to explain everything to you, and then all I do is say, look at it, and don't stop looking at it, examine it until you find the answer. But that's the deal. That's just the deal. Okay, this is your problem. It's your life. You're wrecking the world. I'm serious. It's that serious. And so then you come here and say, hey, how can I not feel bad about my life? Change your life. That's how. And the next question that you should ask, which somehow people don't ask, is how do I do that? That's the right question. How do you do it? The answer, of course, is spirituality. Is break free of the pattern, of the underlying tendency, which has caused all these problems, and that tendency is simply selfishness. So break free of selfishness. How do you do it? We have lots of techniques so that you can break free of selfishness. Plenty. Selfishness is a complex topic which we should look at closely. But if we ourselves aren't actually asking, if we ourselves aren't desperate for the answer, then this system, this extremely effective indoctrination and manipulation system, will win. You're just not that strong. Sorry. I know we want to believe, no, I am. You're not. We aren't. We aren't that strong. And it's important for us to face that, or else we're looking forward to the option of hold shame at arm's length until it devours your heart. Don't let that happen. It's a waste of time, because it's not going to work anyway. You're just going to have to face more regret in the end. Every day we live in this is another day that we're going to have to repent later. We're going to have to just work through more of it later. Don't put yourself through that. You're going to have to do it if you do it. So don't do it, and then you don't have to do it. It's as simple as that. So your job is to consider, how is it possible to extricate my mind from the patterns that are the basis of this system? We have techniques for that, but if we don't enter this with the goal, with the purpose of actually changing how we live, then all of this just becomes another product. This is just one more consumer product for you to come on a Sunday evening and acquire and possess and show off to your friends because now you're so spiritual. That cannot be what this becomes. Then even this has just become one more cog in the machine that's eating the world. It's our job to enter this with absolute, uncompromising and unrelenting integrity. Whatever happens. Yes, even if that means you don't have a nice apartment and you're uncomfortable. Yes, even if that means that people don't accept you and don't like you. And yes, even if it kills you. Yes, even if it kills you. That's why I say this is more important than your life. And this might kill you. People who do this have been killed consistently through human history. This might kill you. Yeah, it might. But the situation is that it's better for you to be killed than to kill. And that's what we're doing right now. We are killing. We can think that this collapse, this environmental collapse, this social collapse, is something that may happen someday. I went to this climate event where they said we have 12 years. Where do they come up with these numbers, 12 years? We don't have 12 years. We have negative 40 years. We crossed it 40 years ago. We crossed it 10,000 years ago. This destruction of life has been happening for a long time. You can say civilization hasn't collapsed yet. Well, your civilization hasn't collapsed yet because you were busy causing other civilizations to collapse. And they just got erased from history. So we think, oh, never mind them. As they say, you won't believe that collapse is real until it has happened to you. But that's delusion. It's why I say this is more important than your life, because you should prefer to die than kill. What is it that will allow us to actually live that way? And the answer is this path. So when I teach this path, when people really teach this path, it should be taught with this urgency, with this desperation. How do I actually change how I live so that I can escape from the state of mind, selfishness, which has caused a system that is eliminating life on the planet? For what? For social delusion and human comfort. It's our job to break free of that. That's why we come on Sundays. That is why we come on Sundays. And I know, it's asking a lot, asking a lot, asking a lot. You're asking a lot of us here. That's right, I'm asking a lot. And I'm aware that in giving talks like this, there are going to be fewer people who come. Fine, there are fewer people who come. I acknowledge that, I accept that, because a lot of people aren't going to like this kind of talk. Okay, fine. But it's better to do the right thing than to do the wrong thing. So this kind of talk just has to be given. We have to face this. We have to look at it, and that's ultimately what I'm asking each person here to do. Face it, look at it, examine, be urgent, want the answer. Want the answer that will destroy your life. Because, sorry, but if you have an issue with shame, your life isn't that good. Don't cherish it. I know it might seem good. It's not. If you have a life you're ashamed of, don't cherish that. Discard that. Throw it out. It's not worth protecting. It's not worth having. And know that if you throw it out, and only if you throw it out, you will find a joy that's greater than it offers to you. You will. You will. You can't miss it. You cannot miss it. You cannot. It's not like other things. You cannot miss it. If you enter this with that integrity and willingness to sacrifice, you cannot miss this joy that you would prefer to have if you would prefer to have one day of this joy than 100 years of whatever happiness this typical life offers. If you experienced it and then someone said, okay, now you know what this is, you can have this joy for the rest of the day, or you can just give this joy up forever, and then you can live for 100 years in your same materialistic, shameful life. You would choose that one day and say, yes, kill me at the end of the day. I'll take it. It has to be this real. Otherwise, we don't understand the significance of love for life, for all living things, even for ourselves. So, if you want to overcome shame, stop living the life you're ashamed of. These tools are what allow you to do that. The most common state of mind for a human being to abide in is involvement in story, in narrative, in imaginary storylines about what's happening. The structures that are eating the world, destroying life, are built up on this act of delusion in the human being. We tell stories about things rather than staying with the direct experience. We tell a story about it. Without putting undue pressure on yourself, without causing unnecessary suffering, without forcing yourself, simply pay attention to your breath. Pay attention to the feeling of breathing. Without paying attention to any stories you might be telling about it. And certainly without paying attention to any other stories. So, perhaps you'll remember what happened yesterday. What did I do? What did they do? How did that play out? That's a story. Set it aside and come back to your breath. Ah, now I'm attending to my breath. That also is a story. It's not the direct experience of feeling the body sensations of breathing. So return to those body sensations. Oh, I just got distracted. I'm no good at this. That's a story. Extract your awareness from the confines of that story and return to the direct experience of feeling the body sensations associated with breathing. If we're putting pressure on ourselves and saying, you should be doing a better job, that's a story. It's just about returning to this moment of the direct feeling, the experience of body sensations, of the breath. That's all. If we can do that, we have freed our minds, and therefore our lives, from addiction to participation in structures of injustice. Therefore, we make that our task. Without story about it or about anything else, just attend to the direct experience of feeling body sensations associated with breathing. a direct experience of feeling your breath. Every time you bring your attention back to that, you're doing the work that saves the world. You're no longer giving your attention to the basic pattern that has produced the destruction of life on this planet over the past several thousand years. There's a freedom. There's a sense of relief. There's even a joy, a happiness, a rejoicing that comes with that moment. You don't need to look for it or tell a story about it. It becomes apparent of itself as we do this again and again, extracting our attention from these stories, and once again attending to direct experience of breathing. There's no need to tell a story about how well you're doing this exercise. It's a clever trick to trap you again. Don't fall for that trick. Instead, attend to the feeling of your breath. For most of us, there are lots of stories that will try to call us back so that our minds can once again be utilized to support and maintain this intersubjective system of profit maximization, of power. And therefore powerlessness. Don't buy it. Once again, set aside that story, whatever it is, and return to the direct experience of feeling your breath. Story after story will tempt you or threaten you. Call their bluff. Return to your breath. In a few seconds, I will ring the bell. If you'd like, continue this practice while you move. You can move in any way you'd like. Go outside if you'd like. Get some water if you'd like. This period will last a few minutes, so please be ready to come back. in 4 or 5 minutes. And experiment with maintaining this technique while in motion. How can we move? How can we act without telling stories about it? In order to facilitate that, I'll ring the bell after a few minutes to signal to you to come back so that you don't need to remember that. Once again, continue to attend to your breath. Just a minute more. Continue with the same technique, following your breath. Very good. And in escaping from imprisonment in our fictional worlds, we have the opportunity to become the master of these fictional worlds. And with this we gain great power. So take some time now, the remainder of our meditation session, to tell a new story about your future. How will you live from now on that you can live truly and legitimately without regret, without shame? As you do this, please take it very slowly, step by step. Very slowly, step by step. The way to do this slowly and step by step is to just tell a little bit of the story until you get some emotional reaction. Maybe you feel excited, peaceful, grateful about the possibility of living in this way. If so, pause and deeply experience that feeling. Maybe you feel sad, afraid, confused when you imagine living in this way. If so, pause. Take some time to feel that fully. So as you retell the story of your future, experimenting with new stories that are more true to your conscience, give special attention, give time to the emotions that arise with that. Perhaps pleasant, perhaps unpleasant. In any case, feel them fully. Feel them in your body fully. That's the process that purifies and untangles our lives. continue with this technique for a little longer. Tell a new story. Story without regret or shame. About a life you can be truly proud of. Which we're not participating in, complicit with, evil, in which our gifts are truly given to the world, in which we're not compromising or selling out. And do this slowly. Tell the story bit by bit and notice emotions that come up with it. Some of them may be very positive, some of them may be very negative. Some of them may be pleasant, others may be unpleasant. In any case, take some time with that. Feel those emotions. Let those emotions happen in your body without resistance. Learn from them and work through them. And then, once that's complete, continue on with the next part of the story. In this way, we become masters of the story. And therefore rulers of the world.
Thank you all for doing this work. Very much appreciated. This is a time for conversation and discussion. So feel free to make use of this time to clarify or add to the conversation.
Question. So, for example, let's say it's about you. So you have a very good friend, a very old friend or relative that's very valuable for you. But
I'm sorry, what was that last statement?
your friend or relative,
Yes.
whatever, who is very valuable for you.
Valuable?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you know a person for a long time,
Yes.
and all of a sudden something happened in life
Mhm.
that reflect you and that person. And that person just sold you. And
Just
you
what?
And this person just sold you.
Sold you?
Yeah, sold you. Like for money or just for sense
Oh.
of being safe in life.
Yes, right.
Or something like that, but you know clear that you've been sold.
Yes.
So, okay, so then my question, what you should do, what you will do in your relationship with that person.
Mm.
I mean, it's not joke, it's just very, very deep and serious.
Of course. Well, let me just repeat this to be sure that we all have it. The question is, let's say you have an old friend, someone who you've spent time with, come to trust and care about, and then they sold you. Maybe they betrayed you, they tricked you, they made use of you to get something. Is that what you mean when you say sold?
No, I meant that it's some kind of danger situation coming from that system that you was talking today about.
Yeah?
And that person just to be safe,
Oh, I see.
just turn out of you and say, I don't want to know you and I don't want to be in danger.
Oh, I see. Very good. Good. So the system, something is happening, and for them, at this time of need, they abandoned you and disconnected so that they would be safe, even though that hurts you.
Yeah, it's not necessarily disconnected, they can come back because you're
Yeah.
friends forever and they like making, like nothing happened.
Uh-huh. Right. But they didn't, I just want to be clear about what you mean when you say sold. I'm sorry, it's taking me a little while to understand.
Right.
But-
I mean that you feel like you've been sold
Yeah.
by your very important person in your life.
Right,
And it was a big surprise for you.
right. And sold means that they made use of you or they abandoned you.
Or whatever. Or just to be safe with money, it doesn't matter, It can be many different things.
In different ways.
Yeah.
So maybe they didn't help you with money or they took money, so they were safe and you were not? Is that what you mean?
No. Money not involved between you and that person.
Okay.
It just, something happened and that person turned out of you and prefer to be safe instead of
what?
continue close and good relationship.
Uh-huh, right. So then they separated from you,
Yeah.
and that made them safe. It didn't make you safe, correct?
I don't know.
So maybe it helped you.
Yeah, it depends how you will feel about it. So what I mean that sometimes people who is very important for you, they just not sold like you told today, not sold themselves only, but they can sell somebody who is in family or who is in friendship or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that I'm not entirely clear about what the word sell means in this case.
It was the same that you was talking about today, that we sold ourselves.
Sold out.
Oh, sold
out.
out.
Yeah.
How would you sell out someone else? What would that look like? Or maybe if someone else understands, you can
Probably
explain.
sell somebody else. So
Yeah.
we just, for example, war, and you go into another side.
Or
To
you
your
said?
animal, yeah, to your enemies, and start to work for them because you think it's more safe for you.
I see, very good. And so then, that period could happen for a while, and then the war, for example, might be resolved, and then they'd want to have a relationship again,
No, why not?
or not. But the point is that for a time, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm not mistaken, the point is you had a trusting relationship with this person, and then they demonstrated clearly that they are not trustworthy. Is that the point?
Yes, I didn't mean to demonstrate it, but that's what
Right.
you find out it's happened.
Right, you found out that the sort of person they are is a person who will not take care of you when you need it, a person who will put you at risk for their own safety. Are these the things you're talking about or not?
I think I might be able to clarify.
Yeah, please, yeah.
So, saying selling out usually means like, you take some sort of bribe or something and then your contract. But
Mhm.
selling out friend, like,
Yeah,
usually I've heard it in the sense of betraying or turning traitor to someone.
yeah,
So it works with the war metaphor as well. Not necessarily
Yeah.
selling them out for something, like getting something like as a price,
Uh-huh.
but just kind of proving disloyal to them
Uh-huh.
for whatever reason. Not necessarily for a temporary duration because of a conflict. War was just a
yeah.
betrayal metaphor, I think.
And is that correct?
Yeah.
Is this a correct interpretation?
I think so, yeah.
Great, so the point is that you're showing that you're not loyal. Is that the point? The person has shown that they are not loyal to you.
No, that's a little bit too egoistical from me,
Uh-huh.
to make them loyal, to keep them loyal. No, that's a little bit different. I
Yeah.
mean,
Not
the good people sometimes doing things like, I don't know, like you say that some people of our society to sold themselves to society to be safe and to have house and, you
Yeah.
know, so they do the same, but they doing it to you, in connections with you. So you understand that they sold you to be safe and to have something, or not to have something, or to feel safe, whatever reason it is.
Right.
It's selling of values. You shared values and then sold those values for another system.
Right. So the values of your relationship, long, good relationship.
Yeah.
For something, just give them away, because they think it's good for them. They don't think that they will not to take care of you. They can continue to take care of you, but it's a relationship is complicated.
Yeah. So when they sell their values or your values, that means that they have compromised, that you used to share certain values, and then they didn't live by those values. They might still want to be friends with you, but they're not living by those values anymore, and in that way they've, in a way, sold your values. Is that correct?
I don't know, it sounds very complicated.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I thought that you talked today about some people that they can sell themselves for to be, to have something or to be somebody,
Right.
and other people don't. So those people who can sell themselves,
Mhm.
they can sell other people too.
And how do they do that? Could you give me an example? An example of someone selling another person?
Or they start to talk about you badly, for example, because it will bring them some
Uh-huh.
benefits,
Uh-huh.
for example.
Very good.
Just example.
Great. Great. And is this then connected with the sense of being not loyal? Or
Yeah,
not?
Sure, sure.
It is. Okay, so this example, just one example, also has disloyalty in it. Because they're not selling out your integrity, but they are selling out your reputation or your connections. They're using you to get something, using your reputation, your history, your relationships.
Yeah, but mostly they saw a good relationship between you and your friends. So
Yes.
just it's a relationship. It's something very valuable.
Of course, absolutely. What could be more valuable?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And then the question is, I think I understand to a certain extent now. So thank you for that clarification, and thanks for taking so long to explain. It's a good use of time. We're not spending time in a way that isn't helpful. So I'm glad that we clarified that to a large extent. And then the question is how to respond to that? How should we deal with that?
Yeah, how you will deal with that person after that you was feeling very clear that it's happened.
Yeah, right. Well, let me just ask a few more questions, not so much to clarify, but to expand on this. Because I'm curious. So, is part of this about realizing that that it's hard to trust them in the future because you're afraid that they might do something like that again?
Yeah, you're not afraid, but you know that they can do it.
Yeah, okay, well said. So you know. Not even afraid, but you're aware that, and before you didn't think that they would do that, but now you know that they might do that, can do that. Very good. And so that's part of it, that's on their end, right? You now know that about them. So that sounds like part of this. And then let me ask just another question. Is part of it that you trusted them before, and then you realize that you shouldn't have trusted them, and now you wonder if your own judgment is trustworthy?
Not really.
Not really.
Not
So,
really.
okay, very good. So the question here isn't about, are you able to see accurately which people will sell you out and which people will not? That isn't the question. You still believe that you can see that clearly, or you're not worried about whether you can see it clearly, but you are worried about how to work with this individual person now that you see that they behaved in a way that was not loyal to you, that used you.
Yeah, no, just I don't know how to respond, so I thought maybe you will give me some good idea how you will respond to such situation. For example, you have good family and you have good money and everything you have and you have nice life and you enjoy it, and all of a sudden, for example, so your wife finds some much richer man and she just go away only because of that. So what you will feel,
Yeah, right, of course. Absolutely. Yes, it's actually an apt example. So I'm not avoiding answering the question, I just want to be sure that when you say such situation, I want to be sure I know what situation. Because in my experience, sometimes part of the issue is how do I deal with it when I thought I could trust someone and then I realize I can't in the future. That they hurt me, even knowingly hurt me, even took advantage of the time when I was most in need, when I was weakest, and used exactly that moment to take advantage of me and use me to acquire something else. That sort of thing has certainly happened to me. And that, and that then can be about how do I treat them in the future, but also it might be, in some situations it might be a question of I made the mistake of not seeing them for who they are, of trusting a person who I shouldn't have trusted, and so now that impacts my relationship with myself. It impacts how I see the faith I have in my own judgment. Because if I can't even see that someone would do that to me, then what can I see? So sometimes the question is about their trustworthiness in terms of their character, and sometimes it's about my trustworthiness in terms of my perception, in terms of my judgment. Yes? And it sounds like for you, you're not referring to doubting yourself. You're referring to doubting them.
Yeah, I know that when people do it in families or at work, they usually showing up like nothing happened and they try to continue to be friends, good friends. But
Yeah,
they
right.
did it, you know, they did it, so...
Right. And so, but in any case, you're not blaming yourself for having failed to see that they would do that to you. You're blaming them for tricking you.
I didn't think about it. Maybe if I will think about it, maybe I start to blame myself. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's often an issue, and if you want to talk about that, we can. But for now, let's just discuss the one topic of how do you deal with someone who, on the one hand, so if I'm correct, I'm hearing two things. One is that they did something that was not loyal, that was untrustworthy, that used you for their benefit. That's the first thing. That was the first mistake on their part. The second mistake was that then they deny that. And they don't have to explicitly deny it, they're just pretending that it didn't happen. And that's what I'm calling denying. So it sounds like both of these things are problems. It would still be a problem if they had done that to you, even if they came back and apologized. But it would be a much smaller problem than the fact that now they're trying to avoid it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, of course, this is a huge question. And it's a question that I think, well, how good the answer is just like you say. You said maybe I could talk about myself. And in my experience, how good the answer is depends mostly on how much a person has experienced this themselves. Because the simple answer, okay? The simple answer, which is a good answer, is don't harbor, don't hold, don't nurture, don't maintain hate towards that person. Okay? It's an easy sentence to say. And if people haven't experienced this, then saying that sentence is at best meaningless, and at worst damaging, at worst disrespectful, because they don't know what they're talking about. You can say words even though you don't know what they refer to. So to have been hurt in this way is very, well, useful for answering a question like this. Because then you're in a position to actually answer. Because you know how hard it is to deal with someone like this. It can be a defining moment in our lives. It can change our future if we're treated in this way. And so we can't just say, well, basically what I hear a lot of people say is don't forgive or something, is basically just don't worry about it. But that actually isn't enough of an answer. And so the question is, okay, we know that what the answer is. The answer is don't hate them. Okay, but the larger question is then how? And how means both how do I release that sense of hatred, but also what you have said. Okay, well if I don't have this hatred, this anger, then how do I relate to them? How do I do it? Because I can't just trust them again. I can't just hand this power over to them again, because they might use it against me again. So what do I actually do? And regarding that, the great challenge, as far as I can tell, at a time like this, the enormous challenge that is that's very difficult to rise to, very difficult to meet this challenge. The challenge is actually without hatred, to get them to see what they did to you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And it's a huge challenge. Partially because if you just go to them and say you're a bad person, then all you'll get is defensiveness. It makes it less likely that they'll see their error. But furthermore, if you come into it with any judgment at all, then you're making it harder for them to judge themselves. Does that make sense? If you come into this with judgment against them, then you're doing the job that they should be doing. They should be judging themselves as a bad person.
That's right, not my job.
It's not your job, it's their job.
Yeah.
And so if you do their job, it'll be harder for them to do their job. Yes? So the challenge is, how can you be honest about what they did? Yes? How can you be really honest about what they did with them, so that they eventually can see the mistake that they made, so that they can experience shame? Yes? That they can experience this good kind of shame, the sense of conscience, realization that they could have done better. Yes? They can experience this good thing. They can correct their behavior. They can realize, I shouldn't have behaved that way. In the future, I should behave differently. They should see that. And the way to do it is to convey to them accurately what happened, but without you judging them for it. Now, you want to accurately convey the pain that you went through, but without judging them for it. And so what is how do you do that? So before I answer that question, does everything I've said so far make sense?
Yes, I think so.
So this is a big challenge. It's your job actually to be sure that they know that they hurt you. You should do that.
I think they avoid it. Like
Exactly. And they will, that's right. And they will try to avoid it and avoid it and avoid it. It's very likely, and yet here you are. If you want to interact with them, you have to, this has to be open in the relationship. And so the challenge is, how do you convey to them that this really hurt me, and also not hate them for it, not, quote, judge them for it. Okay? You can know that they did something wrong, that it was a bad thing to do, that it hurt you, that they shouldn't have done it, they could have done better. And yet that isn't the thing that I mean when I say hatred. Okay? So then the question is, how do you actually do that? Should I answer that question, or do you want to talk about anything I've said so far before that?
I think there is a little bit something else to that, because people actually who did it, they're glad that they did it,
Exactly.
because they change our relationship. They cannot be so close anymore. They kind of a relationship on distance. a little bit distance, like emotional distance,
Of course.
any kind of distance, you know. So, and they actually glad, I think, that they did it.
That's
So
right.
right now they like that kind of relationship, but it's painful for me, very painful. I will prefer to just finish that relationship maybe, but I'm not sure.
Of course, and you may finish it, who knows? But if you're not going to finish it, then, and there's a value in continuing it.
Right.
There is a value in continuing it,
Yeah.
and I'll get to that in a moment, but you may finish it, of course. If you continue it, then this has to be open and clear in the relationship. This point of what happened, and that it hurt you, and that it was wrong. That actually has to be open and clear in the relationship. So then the question is, how do you actually do that? And in my experience, the way to do that is to skillfully, and now this is the part where it all becomes abstract, and I hate that. Because this is not abstract in practice. But it's going to sound abstract. I'm sorry, I don't have another way to say it. It's not my fault. It's all these other people's fault who don't actually believe this and just say it because the Buddha said it and it sounds neat. So this should not sound neat. If this sounds neat, you're not hearing me. But the thing that you have to do is break down the division between self and other. And so now everyone here has dropped off into their Buddhist abstractions. So clean yourself up and come back to reality now. So you have to break down this sense of you're you over there and I'm me over here. One way to do that is to acknowledge your part in it. To acknowledge, in a Buddhist sense, that this is probably, that this is, you could say, your opportunity to work through your own bad karma. That what is happening to you, you could say right now, is because you did this to someone else previously. And because you're going to face this pain right now, you're going to purify that from yourself and demonstrate to them that they can do the same. That they're going to be betrayed someday, they're going to be hurt someday if they don't face this pain right now. Okay? So you accept your part in an abstract way, that this is your karma, this is your previous mistakes that you're now needing to deal with. That you're being hurt in this way because you already hurt someone in this way in the past. And so now it's your chance to purify that mistake on your part. By doing that, you can demonstrate to them that they also can do that. They can face the fact that they have hurt you. They don't actually need to wait for someone else to hurt them to purify this karma. They did something selfish and wrong, and now they should change that. In order to change it, they should regret it. They can regret that even without waiting for someone else to do the same thing to them. Okay? So you're showing them that by doing it yourself. You also can take your part in it by knowing that in some way you did participate, but who knows how much. A lot of the time people can, I hear people say, well, you know, everyone's responsible for these things. I actually don't agree with that. Maybe we're all a little responsible, but certain people make larger mistakes than other people. So you can't just sort of defray, you can't just sort of throw out the blame everywhere and say, so there we are, it's complicated. That's irresponsible. But you can try to find the ways in which you participated in this happening in a very practical way. So in the long-term time scale, you can notice I have done this probably in the past, and so this is my chance to purify those errors. I get to experience now the pain that I have given to others. Yes, the pain that they're giving me is similar to the pain that I have previously given others. By receiving this, I'm purifying that self-centered view. And in that way, I'm maturing, and I'm going beyond my own previous mistakes. In doing that with them, you're showing them how to do it. And it makes it more likely that they will, because you can accurately state that this was hurtful, but without making it into that they're bad and you're good, that you're the victim, okay? You're not the victim, you are just eating the food that you previously made, it's rotten, but you have to eat it. And so then you give them the chance to consider eating their rotten food also. So that's the first thing. But the other thing is to be absolutely clear about the fact that the pain that you're experiencing in the distancing of the relationship, in this now less loving relationship, okay? I'm going to say it again. The pain that you're experiencing now that the relationship is more distant, okay, is not as great as the pain they're experiencing now that the relationship is more distant. It is not.
They didn't get it.
Exactly. I'll say it again. The relationship was close and loving, yes?
Well, not maybe loving, but sincere.
Sincere, very good. Close and sincere.
Yeah.
Warm, excellent. It was this way. Now it's more distant, less sincere, right?
And colder.
And cold, right. And you're experiencing some pain as a result of that, right?
Yeah.
They're experiencing more pain as a result of that.
How we know?
They don't know. But they are. They're wrong about what they're experiencing. Which I know sounds crazy. But it's true. They are experiencing more pain than you. Because in their experience of life, they have more clearly shown, confirmed, than you have, that people are basically untrustworthy. They have to live with a person all the time who has shown that people are basically bad. Yes? You don't have to do that. You're distant from that person and you're sad about that. But they have to face that. They have to deal with that all the time. So the amount of pain that they're experiencing is actually greater than the amount of pain that you're experiencing. It's so great that the only solution they have is to deny it. Your pain is still small enough that you can face it, but their pain is so great that they can't even face it. They just have to deny it. But someday they'll have to face it. They can't avoid it forever. And so you, out of compassion, should help them out of that the best you can. And that does mean, if possible, maintaining the relationship. If you can't, then you can't, but if you can, then it's good for them because it makes it more likely that they'll be able to see the mistakes that they've made. And if you can, it makes it more likely that you also will have to grow, that you'll have to face the mistakes that you've made and grow in that way. It will be likely extremely challenging. Extremely challenging. But if you can do it, yes? If you can do it, which is hard, but if you can do it, then you'll have proven to yourself that you have a love and a wisdom that's more powerful than their selfishness and errors. So that is waiting for you, although it could be, in my experience, is typically waiting a long time. It's a huge process. It's a difficult process that requires a lot of skills. And so we can talk about it in this abstract way, but in really doing it, it's gritty and messy and often quite exhausting. So we should finish there. We're out of time now. But you can, I won't say anything more, but you can say anything to finish this if you'd like.
Yeah, maybe about karma, how to clean it, we can talk another time.
Mhm.
Because it's kind of like full decoration for me, and I'm glad to find my mistakes in previous, period of time. Like you say that I did the same thing for somebody else, but I will honestly say I didn't recognize that moment.
Mhm.
I like to.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you. It's an excellent question.
Thank you.